And so we are in the book of Acts. We are in Acts chapter 27, and we went through 1 through 25 last week, and so we need to conclude that passage as we ran out of time, because there's so many verses there. So in Acts 27, we'll begin in verse 3, and we'll read 9 through 14, and then 21 through 25 to cover our study this morning. And so let's go ahead and read the scriptures. Acts 27:3 says, "And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul, and gave him liberty to go in unto his friends and to refresh himself." And then it says in verse 9, "Now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them, and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. And he says, Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master," okay, the captain as it were, "and the owner of the ship, more than those things which were spoken by Paul." Okay, and then it says, "And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also. And if by any means they might attain to Phoenice," and it says, "and then there to winter." Phoenix, as it translates there in the King James, but it says, "which is an haven of Crete, and lies toward the southwest and northwest." And it says, "And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called the Euroclydon." And then lastly, the last verses we're going to touch on are 21 through 25, which says, "But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and lost." He says, "And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am, and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and behold, God has given you all them that sail with you. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, and it shall be even as it was told me." Okay, so then back in verse 3, to start our text. But throughout this text, they were constantly battling storms, one after the other. And mind you, this is the Apostle Paul. And, just the guy that happened to pen most of the New Testament. So, again, this is one of the special forces of God, one of those mighty men of valor in high favor with the Lord. And so what happens here, he's imprisoned wrongfully, falsely accused for preaching the gospel and doing the will of God. And then he's now on a ship. He's headed towards, being seen by Caesar, which, otherwise he could have kind of avoided and gotten out of, but God had plans for him to go and preach the gospel to him. And yet, what happens? He's confronted by storm after storm and all of these troubles to get to where he's going as a prisoner. So anyways, it's just, it's fascinating, but he's one of the elite, the special forces, mighty men of valor, who was imprisoned wrongfully. Okay, so, but then ultimately, he had to deal with these things regardless. The winds were opposed to him, and he can't seem to get where he wanted to go. And so they end up experiencing the loss of the ship. And you would think this is the perfect chance for him to break away and break free and escape. But, Paul stays and completes the journey all the way back into captivity there in Rome. And so, very powerful testimony. So this kind of idea or concept that all you have to do is, again, have faith in God, and everything's going to run smoothly, everything's going to fall into place, and you're going to be thriving in all circumstances. That's not reality. We're not yet in heaven. In God's kingdom, yes, everything will be perfect. Everything will be finally made right. There will be no more war. All these things will be, overcome, and we won't be dealing with this attack and this constant, battle and this war that we experience in spiritual warfare with the devil and the powers of evil. So, but until then, we have to be prepared, okay? And God says, again in His Word, don't be offended. Don't take offense because things aren't going the way that you had planned and that you wanted, and you're not receiving the things that you want when you want them, but no, He says, be content. Be grateful. Understand that God's with you and He's for you. He's going to bless you. He's going to take care of you. He's not going to neglect you. He's not going to withhold anything from you. And so we, as believers, is hey, you know what? If something comes up and it's not what we were hoping and not what we desired or not what we were planning, okay, all right, Lord, how can I navigate this? How do I face this? What should I do? You come to the Lord and you work and you trust in Him, bringing your prayers and concerns to Him, and He will guide you and navigate you through unto the place of safety and blessing and favor. And so it's like, again, if necessary, you might lose some material things along the way. But that's why we got to keep them with an open hand. Not trying to hold on to everything that we, it's like, Lord, you gave, and the Lord, you can take away. Nevertheless, blessed be your name. It's, I'm not going to try to cling to these things, but I'm going to cling to you and enter into your blessings, which is the salvation of my life and those that are with me, And so, He, here it goes on. Do the winds feel contrary to you this morning? Are you in the midst of a great tempest or a raging storm? Does it feel as if the storm is going to cast you on the rocks and dash you into pieces? Does it feel like you're not getting anywhere, and that no matter how hard you try, you can't seem to make any progress? Well, this is what we saw that Paul was experiencing in these circumstances. And so, but look, the Lord is with you, the Lord is for you, and being in His keeps, you are completely safe. If the Lord brings you unto Himself, then it was His plan and His will, and He brought that to pass, and it will be a blessing. It will be a good thing if that is what God so wills. If He then brings you into these storms, but then He will see you through out to the place of peace and safety and blessing and favor. But again, that's only a guarantee for those who have humbled themselves, asked for the forgiveness of sins and repented of those sins and received Jesus, believing in Him. They are the ones that have been given God's Holy Spirit indwelling in them, and then He is never going to leave them, nor forsake them, nor fail them, but He will help them and see them through whatever it might be that you might have to endure. But then here we see in verse 3, it says, of 27, the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul. So here we have a secular, ruler, and he chose to give favor to bless Paul. And I can guarantee you that man ended up receiving blessing, receiving favor, receiving grace from God because of it. And so this is what something, so this is what he has done for someone who has been called of God in this position. And as he did this to him generously, he said he can go and meet with his friends, he can go and get refreshed and get taken care of. He didn't have to do this. In many other cases, he just could have treated him poorly, but rather he blessed him, and he was, I guarantee you, blessed because of it. So this is what we see in the scriptures in Matthew 10 and 40 through 42. It says, "He that receives you receives me." And he's speaking to the apostles, the disciples, and he says, "And he that receives me receives him that sent me. He that receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. He that receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whosoever shall give even simply a drink unto one of these little ones, a cup of cold water, only in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward." And so this is something that I wanted to discuss with you, to entreat. So yes, we understand we're all just regular men and women before God. And yes, it is true that, again, we all are equal in God's eyes, but yet God calls individuals, calls people into a position of authority, and we should respect and honor and bless those who God has placed in authority over us in our lives. And when you do that, then you see the favor, you see the grace, the blessing of God in your life. But when you come against and attack and you curse or try and oppose those who are set in authority over you by God, then it brings trouble, it brings turmoil, it brings all kinds of havoc in your life. And it's just like God said even to the Jewish people. He said in Genesis 12:3, it says, "And I will bless them that bless you, and I will curse them that curse you." And so it goes for all those that are believers as well. I truly believe if you are harsh towards and evil towards Christians and you abuse them and you take advantage of, you will suffer consequences because of it. Because it's God's favor that has been given to them, God's blessing through Christ Jesus. And so anyways, we are called as the people of God and as God's followers to submit ourselves, to honor, to respect those who God has placed in authority over us in our lives. And so there's that case, but then in addition, again, we should be loving, supportive, kind, ministering to those who are of the household of faith, that are believers around us. And the more that we, again, mistreat, abuse, take advantage of those that are believers around us, it's just going to cause us more trouble and grief. That's the result of our choice, our desire of sin, and doing those things that are opposed to Him. But Psalm 105:15 also puts it in this way. It says, saying, "Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm." It's not in the heart of God and the will of God. Now, again, yes, again, we are all equal in the eyes of God, but yet God has called individuals to certain positions of authority and to influence for purposes for God's kingdom and for furtherance of His gospel, for the advancement of His will. And just like, in a marriage relationship, a wife submitting unto her husband in honor of God or what have you, but this is just because God's given these positions of authority and roles that God has provided for God's blessing in your life, for God's favor, for good things to come about, and for the best possible ends. Hebrews 13 and verse 17, it says this, "Obey them that have rule over you, and submit yourselves, It says, for they watch for your souls, as they must give an account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief. Okay, it says, for it is unprofitable for you if you just give them a hard time, you harass them, you give them trouble constantly. It's not going to benefit, it's not going to bless you in the end if you choose, this route of trying to fight against them continually. And so there's what we see in this case. Julius blesses Paul, and he will be blessed because of it. Then it goes on, and Paul tried to talk to these individuals who he was sailing with, and he told them, do not set sail. You are going to have all kinds of problems. He told them, not because he was just thinking this up in his own head, because he prayed to God, he sought God, and this is what the impression that he received was, don't do this. And they didn't want to listen to him. He was the spiritual individual with authority that was with them, and they didn't want to heed and give credence to his words. And so they decided that they thought they knew better, is what happened. It says, now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, verse 9, because the fast was now already past, and that was the fast of the Day of Atonement that they just had completed. And fascinating, that day of deliverance and salvation, that Day of Atonement was what they were fasting for in the situation that they were in. It says, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them, and he said unto them, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only for the lading in the ship, but also our lives. So he's pleading with them not to go. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master, the captain of the ship, the owner of the ship, more than those things which were spoken by Paul. Because they didn't get it. They didn't process. He was seeking God. He was led by God. And God was giving him this vision and giving him this direction. He gave it and delivered it to them, and yet they decided to rebel and to go against what Paul had said, and this is what happened. And because the haven was not... so now they're looking at the natural circumstances. They were looking at just what they could observe and what they could figure out themselves. And so here's thinking in their natural sinful flesh, they thought in this manner, hey, look, this place isn't really great to stay in for the winter, so, we probably should set sail and move on. And they said, the more part advised to depart. And then it says, if by any means they might attain to Phoenix. And it actually spells it in the way we do here in Arizona. So it is true that Phoenix is a good place to winter in. But it goes on, and it literally... I have it circled here in my scriptures, and it's Phoenix. But it says, which is in the haven of Crete, and lies toward the southwest and northwest. But then it says, and when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose. So now, okay, the wind's nice and gentle. Everything is kind of improved. Good. We're good to go. We're going in, despite what Paul said. And we're going to set sail. We've got it figured out. We'll handle this, Paul. You don't need to be involved. And so they did their own thing. They went their own way. And it says, but not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called the Euroclydon. So then they were put into a position where they couldn't control themselves. They had to let the wind just drive them, and ultimately they did suffer the loss of that ship. And so, it would go on to say in verse 21 and continuing on, it says, but after long abstinence, Paul stood forth. He was quiet for a long time, and in the midst of them, and said, sirs, you should have listened unto me. You should have hearkened to what I said, and not have loosed for Crete, and to have gained the harm and loss that you suffered. But it says, now I exhort you to be of good cheer. So, to be... excuse Be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. So again, you might suffer this experience and you might lose some things materially along the way. You might suffer some kind of difficulty and go through loss of things in a physical, material sense. But again, what's most important and what's most valuable is your life and your soul and those that are with you, and they will be safe. Those that travel with you will be covered. They will be blessed. But it says, and goes on, it says, but for there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, you must be brought before Caesar, and behold, God has given you all them that sail with you. It says, Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, be of good comfort, take heart, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. And so this is it. Be of good comfort, be of good cheer. I believe God for what He has said, and we are going to be taking care of those who have believed, those who have received Jesus, those who have truly come to that place of acknowledging their sin and repenting of it and inviting Him in. They have this favor, they have this blessing, and they have all things to look forward to. You have all hope. He is our living hope. Okay, so He lives in resurrection form in heaven in the presence of the Father, and literally we have this guarantee that He will be with us and He will navigate our ship into our lives, more importantly, into that place of His haven and blessing. So it says this in Numbers 16, in verse 3, it says, And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. So the people, the Jewish nation, came against Moses and Aaron, their leaders, and said to them, You take too much upon you. He says, Seeing all that the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them, wherefore then do you lift yourselves up above the congregation of the Lord, is what they questioned. But the reality was that God had appointed Moses, and God had appointed Aaron, and God was using them and for His glory, for His purposes and will, and they were to submit unto them, and yet they tried to exalt themselves, and they thought that they could take over, that they would lead and direct and rule over this people, to lead them in God's path without Moses and Aaron, whom God had appointed. And in so doing, they ended up rebelling against God, denying His word, and ultimately suffered the consequences. So it would go on to say in verses 20 through 22, in that same chapter of Numbers, chapter 16, it says, okay, let's go from 27 here. It says, So they got up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan and Abiram on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood in the door of their tents, and their wives and their sons and their little children. And Moses said, Hereby you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works. He says, For I have not done them of my own hand. He says, If these men die the common death of all men, if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But it says, But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open, and her mouth and swallow them up, it says, with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then you shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. They have fought against God, they rebelled, and ultimately, again, they ended up perishing. They became accursed for their denial and rejection of God's word and following God's will and commands in respecting that who was in authority over them. And so there's 1 Samuel 15 and verses 22 and 23. And Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices? Meaning you come and you do a religious practice, but your heart is far from me. He's saying, is God really wanting you to make all these special sacrifices and offering and doing these things, but yet you refuse to obey my voice? Obey my commands. He says, is in obeying the voice of the Lord. He says, behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. It says, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. This is demonic. It is completely, diametrically opposed to God to deny and reject His word and to go against it. And stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. It says, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, He has also rejected you. And so it's, it rejected you from being king. And so ultimately, this is what we desire to avoid, to not fall prey to. But God help us by the grace of the Lord to honor and respect, to give a special favor, honor to those who are in authority over us, and ultimately to God's word and His commands, that we might see God's increase and God's fruitfulness, God's blessing upon our congregation and on our families and in our lives. May God be glorified. Let's go ahead and pray as we bow our heads and close our eyes. Just